I am beginning to realize the severity of the mistake I've made. You see, I thought I was making a video assessing the unpredictable quality of animation in Sonic the Hedgehog games, but what I did not realize in that fit of creative enthusiasm and, let's be honest, morbid curiosity, was that I had just stepped into the Sonic YouTube equivalent of quicksand. Make no mistake, I am not a Sonic the Hedgehog fan, although when I say that, people seem to have a difficult time believing me, and yeah, okay. But whether or not I like Sonic is no longer relevant, because now I have become one of those people who talks about Sonic. And Sega is never gonna stop making Sonic the Hedgehog games, so I'm stuck here now. In releasing that video, I entered the Hedgehog's gravitational pull, and I do not have an exit strategy. Sonic died this year, and yet here I am. Nothing changed. What I'm trying to say is, welcome to New Frame Plus. Let's talk about the animation in Sonic Frontiers. As we covered last time, good Sonic game animation boils down to 4 things: appeal, characterization, game feel, and polish. But different games have different animation needs, and Sonic Frontiers is a rather different kind of Sonic game. So let's dig into this, starting with... This is a very important category of animation for any Sonic game, because it's what you're gonna spend the majority of your time doing, running and jumping. But Sonic Frontiers has you running and jumping across a large, open 3D environment, with mostly complete freedom to explore in any direction you want. And historically speaking, high-speed, free-form exploration is not something that Sonic games do well. 3D Sonic has usually worked best when he's confined to a track, when the only direction available is either forward or generally to the right. Take those rails away and things tend to get very slippery very quickly. So with the constraint of that track removed, and the player now in full control of both speed and direction, Sonic's handling has to be far more carefully tuned, and his animation has to be a lot more adaptable and do a lot more heavy lifting to provide players the clear visual feedback they need to be able to feel in control during play. To be honest, when I first saw that Frontiers was going to be an open-world platformer, I was pretty confident predicting this was going to be a mess. But, lo and behold, Sonic's running and jumping in Frontiers is pretty darn solid, actually. Now, this is largely a technical animation victory. If you look at each of Sonic's animations individually, the jump, the run, the walk, a lot of them are very similar to what we have seen in previous 3D entries. They all look fine, but I don't think they are the reason this feels better. The difference is in the implementation. Sonic's animation here is very responsive to player input, quickly conveying his direction, current speed, and which traversal state he is in, whether that be running, sprinting, jumping, bouncing, rail grinding, whatever. And crucially, his animation, when combined with the effects and the camera and the audio, effectively sells the exhilaration of speed without actually zipping you through this world so quickly that you feel completely out of control. Of course, achieving this comes at a bit of aesthetic cost. Sonic's ability to change direction almost instantaneously, or quickly snap from the animation of one locomotion state to another one with almost no blend or transition between, does mean sacrificing some sense of physicality and realistic weight for the character, but in a game where the player may be counting on that clear visual feedback to make split-second input decisions, that is a very worthwhile trade-off. Granted, the 3D Sonic jank is still here, I'm not saying it's not. Things tend to get real buggy looking at slow speeds, and Sonic transitions out of some animations way too early, snapping from one state to another one well before the previous animation was done. Also, they dropped the squelch on his spinball jump, I assume just to spite me personally. Wait, correction, there is a little bit of squash and stretch on the jump, specifically when you double jump out of a rail grind. Or also when you have double jumped and you hold down A again so you can sort of charge up a little spin dash before you land, then there's a little bit of squelch on the Sonic Ball too. I'm not sure why it's not on any of the other jumps. I'm guessing it must be a bug. I don't know, whatever. I want the squelch back on the jump is my point. It was good. Ultimately, we have seen more polish, appeal, and even personality from Sonic's locomotion and traversal in previous games, but even with those rough edges, no other 3D Sonic has made this feel good before. Not even close. And that is such a game feel victory for this franchise that I'd still call this a win. But okay, that's just Locomotion. What about... I think it's important to understand, combat in most Sonic games is not complicated. Enemies aren't put in these levels so you can fight them. These aren't duels in the field of honor. These enemies are speed bumps. Half the time, you're only attacking them for platforming purposes. Fighting generally just isn't the point in a Sonic game, and in the past, when a Sonic game has tried to make combat be a more robust aspect of what is still fundamentally a running and jumping game experience, that has not gone well. Except for the boars. The boars were perfect. So here, again, Sonic Frontiers is taking on a pretty scary challenge for this franchise by attempting to make prolonged battles one of the load-bearing pillars of the play experience. This world is littered with enemies who can take a lot of hits, who each represent a kind of combat puzzle for the player to solve. And this greater emphasis on combat necessitates a considerably wider range of combat moves for Sonic. So now, Sonic's homing attack, which has basically been 3D Sonic's main way of attacking enemies since Sonic Adventure, has now been turned into just the distance-closing opener for a brand new attack combo. And this combo feels quite good. Each individual attack might be a bit hard to make out in the flurry of motion and hit effects, but thanks in part to the camera swinging out to the side to give us a better angle, the way Sonic quickly snaps to and holds on each heavily exaggerated pose adds just enough clarity for your brain to connect the dots between each move. And as you progress further into the game, you will unlock more and more increasingly flashy combat moves. A lot of effort and attention has clearly gone into making these feel cool. And while I do think having a lot of your moves essentially be micro cutscenes you have to watch every time you use them can get old after 20 or 30 times, the presentation on these is executed with so much more meticulous care than anything the previous games have delivered. Sonic's new suite of combat animations is, at least in terms of visual appeal and relative polish, one of this game's animation strengths, I'd say. But if we're gonna talk combat spectacle, we also need to talk about... Sonic Frontiers aims for spectacle with its boss encounters in a way that no other Sonic game has ever really pulled off. And while that spectacle may not always result in fantastic play, I honestly found like half of these really irritating, if we're talking strictly in terms of visual presentation, for Sonic Team, this is a noticeable step up. Sonic Frontiers, broadly speaking, is aiming for a grander sense of scale than you get in most Sonic experiences, and these fights are where those efforts are felt most clearly. And the biggest contributor to that difference, the real animation MVP in Sonic Frontiers, is the camera. The way an action is staged, the choice of camera angle and framing, the cinematography can single-handedly make or break the impression that action leaves. I mean, just look at the difference between what this Street Fighter attack feels like with its custom camera and then without it. And across the board, I see so much more intent and care given to the staging of Sonic Frontiers' action, to the dance happening between the boss's motion and the camera framing them, and all the little ways the camera works to make so many of these boss attacks and moments feel so much bigger and cooler. Of course, the execution on the animated spectacle in these fights is not consistent across the board. This gameplay camera, for all of its aesthetic improvements, is not always your ally. And a lot of these battles have trouble finding the appropriate balance between spectacle and clarity. I mean, this is just noise. Also, it's pretty clear that this game just cannot technically deliver on all of the big moments this team's aiming for, no matter how powerful the hardware you're playing on. And honestly, even with all of this cool-looking stuff, there is still so much room for improvement, so much more refinement that could happen with some extra polish time. Even so, this kind of shonen anime action is a real good fit for Sonic. This feels so right. Like, this character's been going Super Saiyan since day one. If any retro platformer mascot should be doing cool anime fights, this is your guy. But that brings me to... As we have already discussed at length, Sonic games do not have a stellar history when it comes to cinematics and narrative animation in general. The high point for Sonic cutscene animation was Sonic Boom, a game that was otherwise kind of a train wreck. And the low points have been truly dire. Uncanny motion capture making everyone look like humans wearing mascot suits, giant faces that barely animate, giant faces that animate entirely too much. But really, we haven't seen a true cinematics disaster from Sonic since 2006. No, in recent years, the narrative animation in Sonic games has just been serviceable. A lot of kind of bland performances that are further constrained by these awkward body proportions and these face designs that simply lack expressive range. And Sonic Frontiers pretty much continues this trend. A lot of these scenes, most of them really, are very flat. Half of them are constructed of little more than these looping idle poses and some auto-generated mouth flaps, with the vocal performances doing all of the heavy lifting when it comes to conveying emotion. And to their credit, even when the animation's not doing anything to help, these voice actors are carrying these scenes. On the one hand, you could argue that this game's more melancholy tone does lend itself to a more muted, understated style of character performance. On the other hand, there is a difference between subtle performance and no performance. That said, a few of these scenes along the game's golden path have clearly been given more attention. They have more specific expressions and acting choices, characters clearly making eye contact and listening to each other. And in those moments, this game's cutscene animation is as good and sometimes even a little better than what we've seen in other recent efforts like Sonic Lost World and Sonic Forces. I've talked before about how the eyes and the hands are the most expressive parts of our body, right? And how this incarnation of the Sonic crew having such large eyes and hands that aren't being animated is so detrimental? Well, in some of the better animated scenes here, you can really see the difference that decent hand and eye animation can make. When these characters are expressing with their face and connecting with each other, when they are actually acting and the animators have time to give them appealing expressions and hand poses, it makes such a huge difference in how good these characters look on screen. This still represents an incremental gain at best, and doesn't hold a candle to the personality or appeal on display in Sonic Boom's performances, but in its better moments, Frontiers does at least help to point to where the biggest gains are to be made. This little dance, though, this is good. Just look at him go. Honestly, I know I've said that this iteration of these characters is constrained by their proportions, and I still think that's true, but if you want to see just how much more could be squeezed, even out of these designs, go look at what they're doing with the latest Sonic TV series, Sonic Prime. Now, obviously, Sonic Prime is going for a slightly different tone and a bouncier energy, but the broader expressive range here, the subtleties in expression, and the fidelity of performance, Sonic games could have this. Like, I know that TV animation is its own world with very different production challenges and constraints, so it's not a one-to-one situation. My point is, even with this iteration of Sonic, with this limiting design, greater expressive potential does exist. And for all of its failings, the Sonic Boom game did manage to replicate the animated appeal of the TV show it was modeled after, so it can be done. So, how do we rank this? Compared to previous 3D Sonic titles, I would say the animation in Sonic Frontiers averages out to a genuine improvement. It may not quite match the level of gameplay animation polish that we see in Sonic Lost World, and it may still be a far cry from the animated appeal in Sonic Boom, but the gains they make in game feel during moment-to-moment play are pretty substantial, and all of the new combat additions are bringing some great visual flair. And the clear efforts made to push the action spectacle in this game further has paid off. The added attention to camera work and choreography turns some of these boss fights into genuinely cool set-piece moments. Overall, if I had to pick my top 5 Sonic games with the best animation again, I could see Frontiers swiping one of those spots. But then, if we were to zoom out a bit, expand our focus beyond Sonic games for just a moment and compare Frontiers to the output from some other comparable studios, other mascot platformers, other 3D games with stylized, animal-adjacent casts, that shift in perspective is not flattering. It kind of reveals the vast amount of room for animation improvement that still exists here, how wide the gap between Sonic and his competition has grown over the last 26 years. Like, yeah, this fight looks really cool compared to past Sonic boss battles, for sure, but Like, imagine what some of Sega's competition could do with a fight like this. Like, can you imagine how good the Insomniac crew could make this fight look? But then again, Sonic Team is not Insomniac. And that's not their fault. Most studios aren't Insomniac. They have like 80 animators over there. It's stupid. But that's not my point. This is my point. Something that has become increasingly clear to me studying all of the games in this series, and it's not like a bombshell revelation or anything, it's something that's easy to forget sometimes, is that Sonic titles are mid-budget productions. These games are not made with giant teams. It is not going to take you 40 minutes to watch the credits at the end of a Sonic game. These games are not given long production cycles, and I would wager they are rarely given extensions. Like, if the deadline to ship a Sonic game is looming, but the game's not ready yet and it needs more time and money to be ready, history suggests it's probably not gonna get it, right? Sega's gonna put that game on shelves as planned. I would wager this is probably one of the biggest reasons the quality of Sonic games is all over the place like it is. And yeah, that kinda sucks sometimes. But then, the more I think about it, maybe that strategy is also the reason we still have Sonic games coming out at all. Think about it, they have a dedicated base of fans who will probably buy most of the games they make. If you keep the budgets to these games relatively low, then you minimize the financial harm any given game could do by flopping. No one Sonic game is given the chance to lose enough money that it could risk the franchise's future. And I don't have inside information here, this is me speculating, but if I'm even half correct, maybe the best favor Sonic Team could do themselves in the future is to try scaling their ambitions down a bit. Try building smaller, tighter Sonic experiences that they can consistently deliver in a complete, highly polished state. But that's not really the Sonic Team way, is it? And I do have to admit, I kind of sincerely love that about them. I mean, love these games or hate them, but Sonic Team goes for it, man. They are rebooting and rebuilding the foundations of Sonic gameplay constantly. What if Sonic played more like Mario Galaxy? What if we do both 2D Sonic and modern Sonic gameplay in the same game? Like, hey, that Breath of the Wild vibe is cool. Let's put our guy in a big ol' apocalyptic open world with sad flashbacks and sad piano and map towers to climb and little round goobers to collect. Will somebody please get that grouchy hedgehog a gun? And honestly, considering the amount of ambition on display here, Sonic Frontiers is really solid. Like, this crew not only ventured into some unfamiliar design space, but they also took on a bunch of old animation and design challenges that past 3D Sonic games have fumbled so badly, and despite all that, they still managed to deliver results as good or better than past efforts. And good for them, I say. Sincere applause. Anyway, I'm gonna go try to think about something other than Sonic the Hedgehog for a while I can. So, thanks for watching, bye!